Hello and welcome to Quilt Addicts Anonymous. I'm Stephanie Soebbing. This is the final video in our Triangle Masterclass series where we've taken you through everything you need to know to make triangles perfect every single time when you're quilting. You can use the tutorials to just master the techniques for the pattern you're working on, or you can use the pattern that we have developed to teach you this. It's called Raspberry Sherbet. You can download it on our website, shop.quiltaddictsanonymous.com. There may still be kits available, so make sure you check those out as well. It uses the fabrics that we used in the quilt along, as well as the background of your choice. There's lots of different options for that. All right, so today's video is all about mitered borders. Now, this is not my typical way of doing borders. I only do it when I feel like the quilt calls for it. And in my opinion, the quilt calls for it when either the fabric would look great going together at a 45-degree angle, so stripes are great for mitered borders, or there's a lot of triangles like there are in this one. So for example, we have got triangles going all the way out to the edge of our blocks, and then we also have triangles in the border of this quilt. So I want to also have triangles in the border separating the blocks from our outer border to continue that diagonal line going all the way out. So I'm going to show you how to do it today. It can look intimidating when you first do it, but it really is not bad once you break it down. So the first thing you need to know about doing a mitered border is you're going to cut your borders a little bit differently. So typically when we're doing a quilting pattern, we're going to attach a border to one side first. So it's going to be the same width as, say, our finished center of the quilt. And then you will do your second side, like say if you do your top and bottom first, your sides then are going to be the length of your quilt plus your borders, because we're adding those on second and they have to go up to the bottom and down to the bottom. That is not the case with the mitered border. The mitered border, all of them have to be cut so that they are the width that it's going to be once all the borders are attached. And you're going to do that for all of them like this, because you can see it goes all the way out to the side, and it does that on all 4 quarters. So in this case, what we're going to do is we're going to take the measurement of our 3 blocks plus the measurement of the finished width of our border, plus then you're going to add a 1/2 inch for your seam allowances. So we're like 16, 16, 16 plus. We're going to add 4 inches for here, so that's how we end up with 52.5 once we add our seam allowances. And that is going to be our width of all 4 of our borders in this case. Now, it might not always be the same amount for all 4. If you have a rectangle, for example, you're going to have a different measurement for your sides because it's going to be a little bit longer. But it still needs to be to the finished width once the borders are attached in order for everything to fit together correctly. All right, now I'm going to show you how to mark so that way we can put these on correctly. All right, so I want all of my little arrows here to be pointing toward the quilt. So I'm going to make my marks on the bottom where the arrows are pointing to. So I'm just going to go ahead and flip everything over here. So this border right now is measuring 2.5 inches wide. It'll be 2 inches once everything's sewn together and the seam allowances are eaten up. So what I need to do here is mark my 2.5 inches in of where it's going to be when everything's done. So if you had a 3.5 inch wide border, you would be marking in at 3.5 inches. So it's whatever this width is, that's where you need to mark. And I'm also going to mark a 1/4 inch in. So I've got 2.5 lined up here. Then I can see my little 1/4 inch mark, and I want to put just a little dot there. You can also do a little plus. I'll do a little plus here. You guys can see it really clearly. So that is where I need to line things up. Now I need to do the same thing on the other side of the strip and then on all of my strips, so that way I know where I'm going when I'm putting these together. Now remember, I want my arrows to be pointing toward the center of the quilt. So I want to make sure that I'm marking on the bottom end, so that way I have the same edge marked when I put this together. Right, we got a nice little plus there. We do the same thing on my others. Now, just to eliminate any guesswork where things might get a little off, I'm also going to mark a 1/4 inch in on all 4 of my corners, because that is going to allow me to be able to match those pins right up, and everything should be good to go. And you can see here, my plus is right over that seam line. That is exactly where it should be. I'm going to go ahead and do some more corners, and then we're ready to start pinning. All right, so this is the part where it might feel a little tricky, but really all we're gonna be doing is matching the center of those plus signs. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take a pin, I'm gonna put it straight through the plus sign that we made on our border piece. And keep in mind, it's gonna be hanging off past, because we have to get all the way out to meet the other edge. Then I'm gonna find the plus sign on the back that I marked on my quilt center. And I'm gonna put it straight through that plus sign. And then I'll know that I have everything lined up exactly where it should be. And I'm ready to go. So now what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna pinch that in place, just like we did with the 2 pinning technique. And I'm just gonna pin to the side. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna pin the other side, and I'm going to sew up until I hit this point, and then I'm going to be able to stop and backstitch, because we want to stop at this point because eventually our border is going to keep going out like that. So it'll be really cool when it's all done. I'm going to go ahead and pin the other side, and then we're ready to start sewing. All right, so we have to leave that corner 1/4 inch open, because that needs to be able to go out and make a 45-degree angle eventually. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna start stitching right on that plus sign that we made earlier, and then I'm gonna stitch forward 3 and back 3 just to keep that in place, keep it from unraveling when we're messing with it a little bit later. And then I'm gonna stitch all the way down to the next plus sign, do the same thing, back stitch, and then we're good to go. I do have my quilt side up because I've got some points coming together here, and I want to make sure I can sew 1 needle width to the right of that so that we don't lose those when we're sewing. So this is just, it's a weird thing when you do it to start, because normally we're used to stitching all the way to the edge when we're quilting, but that is just not the case with a mitered border. You want to leave that open, and you'll see why when we get to the next part. All right, so I'm going to stitch forward 3, back 3, and when you go back, it's important not to go past the center of that plus. And then I can just sew my border on as normal from here. All right, so I'm stitching up to where my second plus is. So I'm just going kind of slow, leaving my pin in place here. I'm going to stitch up to the point where I hit the plus, which I just did. So now I'm going to stitch back 3. And I'm going to go 4, 3 just to tack that in place, but make sure you do not go past that plus. You're going to have problems at the next step. All right, we've got our first border on, and you can see that we're free. We got a little point sticking out there, which we're supposed to. And so next we're going to put our second border on, and we're going to get in nice and close so you can see how this works. It's really slick. All right, so I've got that first border kind of pushed out of the way. If you want, you can put a little pin in there to help keep it out of the way when you're sewing as well. And it is going pretty much right into that seam. I've got a little bit of wiggle room there, which is going to be good for when we actually sew our diagonal border out there. But the next thing I need to do is match my pins, or my little crosses there on the top and bottom, just like we did before. The only difference here is I'm pinned this to the side just to keep it out of the way so I don't actually stitch it in. All right, so I matched my plus, and then your plus should be in pretty much the exact same place as you stopped. All right, got that. We're ready to go. So now I'm just going to go ahead and give that a second pin here. And I'm just going to go ahead and actually go across this time, and then I can remove that. Now the other one, we don't have anything sewed to yet because this is just the second one that I'm putting on, so it's no big deal. I'm just gonna go ahead and match those just like we did before, and then we're ready to stitch just like we did before. The only difference here is that this is pinned out of the way, so that way we don't accidentally stitch over it when we are stitching from our points to points here. And by points to points, I do mean those crosses that we made. All right, so I'm gonna pin just like before, then we're gonna stitch, and then we will be demystified because the next step is not as crazy as it seems. All right, so I'm starting here with the side that already has it sewn on. So you can see I've got my piece here that's pinned out of the way, so we're good to go. So I can just start right on that plus again and start stitching. And I pinned this time to where I can kind of keep everything in place and keep that pin in because it's a little bit behind where my sewing needle is gonna start. That'll make it a little easier to make sure everything is where it should be. All right, so I'm gonna stitch 3 forward, 3 back, making sure not to go beyond that plus, and then stitch as normal till we get to the next plus, and then back stitch again. All right, I'm coming to that plus. I think I'm gonna do my back stitching, and then I'm gonna stitch right in and stop. All right, now before we go any further, I'm gonna press my seams open. I'm gonna be careful not to press this end that I've already got because I already have some pluses in place there that I do not want to go away. And I've got a heat sensitive ink on there. So once it is pressed, that will go away. So I'm just pressing beyond that. And I wanna make sure that the seam that I'm gonna sew up next for this mitered corner is nice and flat before I sew it. Now, if you have not been pressing your seams open to this point, I highly suggest that you do. Your mitered corner is gonna turn out so much better if you do that. And I just press the seams open, and then I just put my iron straight down the center. You should have a nice straight line here and not a wiggle. If there's a wiggle, it means there's a pleat on the other side and it's not gonna turn out the right size. So just keep that in mind as you're working. All right, we're getting toward the corner here. So I'm just gonna press right into that corner. We'll get that going that way. And then I'm going to go the other direction as well and obviously get this section nice and flat too. Now eventually this is gonna lay nice and flat when we open this up. But for right now, I'm just getting it as flat as I can here. And you'll see what happens next. It's pretty slick. All right, I'm stopping a little shy of this 1/4 inch again because I don't want to remove my mark. That way I don't have to remark it again later. All right, so now we're going to get our miter ready to go. So what you're going to do is you're going to get your quilt kind of folded on a 45-degree angle here, like I've done. That way it is nice and flat for this corner here. Now I'm going to go ahead and pin this. So the first thing I'm doing is lining up these corners out here. That's where we're going to stitch into. So that is really important to have that really nice and in alignment. And I'm going to pin across where I'm going to be sewing to help keep that together. And then we're going to do the same thing here. We're going to press these seams, kind of pinch them out of the way so they're pointing toward the quilt. So I'm just going to go ahead and pin those so that they are out of the way. All right, so I can still see where that plus was. There's a little bit of ink there still. So I'm gonna draw a line from where that plus, the center of it is, out to my corner here. And I'm making sure to angle my pen so that it is nice and in line with the ruler. That will give me a really nice 45-degree line. And it's super important to be sewing straight out into this corner. So we're gonna stitch from where the plus is, where the stitching ends, all the way out to this corner. And I do back stitch at the beginning of this. I don't do it at the end because at the end of this, we're gonna add more stuff to it and it won't be as bad. You could do that though if you want, but I typically don't when I'm like out in this little bit because sometimes like the feed dogs can try and eat it and it's just not a good situation. But I will do it at the beginning here. So since I'm not stitching a 1/4 inch stitch, I'm stitching right on this line that we drew. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna move my needle to the center position. I find it's a little easier to stay on it rather than when it's over to the side in the 1/4 inch. All right, so just like when we were starting, we wanna make sure to drop that needle down right where that seam ends and where that plus is. So we're gonna drop it right down. We're gonna stitch forward 3, and we're gonna go back 3, again, making sure not to go beyond that stitching or it won't lay flat. And then we're gonna stay on that line and stitch right out to that corner. All right, you do not want to trim any seams yet because we have to test and make sure that it's gonna lay flat and be where it should be before we do any of that, because you can't go back from when you cut it. All right, so I'm gonna remove that pin that kept those points out of the way, the seams out of the way. Just gonna go ahead and press this open, and then also I'm making sure to open up this seam so that it's gonna lie flat. And I wanna make sure that everything is laying nice and flat, everything is nice and square. And in this case, we're doing really well. I'm really pleased with how that looks. I think it's looking really good. My point is going right to the point of where the miter is, and then the miter continues on out from there. So it's a little pushed up right now because it needs to be pressed, but everything is looking really good. I'm liking how this looks, and so I'm ready to go ahead and do that 1/4 inch trim at this point. All right, I'm just lining up the 1/4 inch seam, our line on that seam, and just trimming the 1/4 inch off. All right, now we're gonna take our iron, and first we're gonna press this miter nice and open. And then we're gonna take and we're gonna press these seams as well, so that way they are also open. I'm gonna hit this side first. And then this side second. There is going to be a teeny little bit of overlap here where this part is pressed to the side just a smidge, but it works out pretty good. Now if I flip it over, give it a little spritz to my spray mister and go from the right side, this is just going to look absolutely fantastic, and it does. We have our nice seam coming straight through our sashing strip here, and then going straight out to the corner. Everything is nice and square. It looks great. I'm really excited with how this turned out. All right, well, now you're gonna keep doing that for the rest of your corners. And just as an FYI, the first time I ever did this, I got my first 3 perfect, and then I screwed up my 4th one. So don't be discouraged if you do mess one up. You can just unpick it and do it again, and it's no big deal. You're gonna be totally fine. That's why you wanna give it a little press open, kind of give it a look-see before you trim to make sure everything looks the way it should before you keep going. All right, well, that is all you need to do to make mitered corners, and you now have all the skills you need to be able to complete the quilt in the quilt along we've been hosting for Raspberry Sherbet. We did all manner of different triangles. We did half square triangles, 1/4 square triangles, also known as hourglass units. We did double pinwheels. We did 4 at a time flying geese. We've covered how to put everything together so you don't lose your points, which also includes some fudging sometimes. And then we covered the 2-penny method, again, so you don't lose any points. Now mitered borders, and that's it. You have everything you need to know. Now we will be doing, this is not officially part of the quilt along, I will be showing you guys a video on how I quilt this. I've got some plans for it. It's gonna be a little epic. I'm pretty excited about my plans for this quilt, but it's not officially part of the quilt along, but stay tuned because we will put another one on there. So make sure you're subscribed here on YouTube and also over on our website at shop.quiltaddictsanonymous.com. I would love to see photos of your finished quilts if you followed along with us for the quilt along. Please either email them to help@quiltaddictsanonymous.com and we'll share them on our social media, or you can share them and tag us on Facebook and Instagram, TikTok, all those fun places. You can find us. And until next time, happy quilting.